Welcome to the Tim Booker book sharing channel. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our updates. Let's explore the world of books together.
Today, I'll be interpreting the book, The History of Nazi Concentration Camps, by the German historian Nikolaus Wachsmann. During World War II, the persecution and slaughter of Jewish people and the populations of occupied European countries by Nazi Germany represent one of the darkest and heaviest chapters in human history. The concentration camps were the primary facilities and locations where Nazi Germany executed this atrocity. According to statistics, in the 12 years of Nazi rule, a total of 27 major concentration camps and over 1,100 smaller satellite camps were established. During this period, approximately 2.3 million victims, including children, were sent to these camps, with 1.7 million people eventually perishing. They died from starvation, disease, forced labor, or were systematically murdered. Long before Nazi Party leader Adolf Hitler seized power in Germany, in his work, Mein Kampf, he extensively discussed the concept of a powerful Germany becoming the master of Europe and constructing a new order in Europe. The implementation of racial extermination against Jews and other so-called inferior races was a crucial component of this horrifying new order. The notorious system of concentration camps was the tool through which Hitler's vision of the new order was concretely implemented. Even today, reflection, investigation, and research into the atrocities committed by the Nazis during World War II continue. How did such a massive criminal institution like the concentration camps come into existence, develop, and operate? From the top-level designers within the Nazi Party to the actual executioners in the camps, and every unfortunate prisoner inside them, what did they experience? Why did such a heinous act against humanity occur in a highly civilized and prosperous Europe of the 20th century? The author of this book, Wachsmann, dedicated a full decade to complete this extensive work spanning over 800,000 words divided into 2 volumes. Renowned British historian Richard Evans, who also studies Nazi Germany, praises it as the most comprehensive and detailed account of the history of Nazi concentration camps across all languages, containing striking details and convincing analysis. Next, I'll break down the main contents of this book into 2 parts. First, let's explore the early development history of the concentration camps, how they started as temporary prisons set up by the Nazis after coming to power to conveniently undermine the legal system and persecute progressive individuals, evolving gradually into permanent terror institutions in Nazi Germany. In the second part, following Wachsmann's narrative, we'll delve into how, after the outbreak of World War II, the concentration camps expanded across all of Europe alongside Nazi Germany's conquests. They served as systematic tools for racial extermination and exploitation of prisoners, providing vital support for Germany's war efforts. Lastly, we'll briefly discuss the underlying societal reasons behind the emergence of the Nazi concentration camp system and the Holocaust. On the damp and chilly evening of March 22, 1933, around 120 so-called political prisoners were transported in open trucks to Dachau, a town near Munich, Germany. There stood a makeshift detention center, hastily repurposed from a defunct military factory. The prisoners were informed they would undergo so-called protective custody there. One of them, a man named Kahn, even wrote a lengthy letter to his wife, assuring her that everything was fine and asking her not to worry. Little did Kahn know, his life would end there a few weeks later. Dachau, a name that would soon become a chilling code, witnessed over 40,000 prisoners lose their lives during its 12-year existence. Though only 2 months had passed since Hitler assumed the German chancellorship, the Nazi Party was eager to commence a crackdown and persecution against dissenters. The staged Reichstag fire of February 27, 1933, orchestrated by the Nazi Party, served as Hitler's pretext. Under Nazi pressure and manipulation, the German parliament passed the so-called Enabling Act, openly abolishing many rights and freedoms granted by the Weimar Republic's constitution, providing the Nazi regime with a supposed legal basis for arbitrary enforcement and persecution. Following this, a massive arrest operation against Nazi Party opposition commenced. The German police and the paramilitary organization controlled by the Nazi Party, the SA, Sturmabteilung, were the enforcers. The crackdown swiftly expanded from the primary opponents of the Nazi Party, such as the German Communist Party and the Social Democratic Party, to encompass citizens from various spheres who expressed discontent with the Nazi rise to power. This included media professionals, intellectuals, social figures, religious leaders, and Jews, among others. Between March and April 1933 alone, an estimated 40,000 to 50,000 German citizens faced so-called protective custody, with around 22,000 still detained by October. How were these prisoners handled? The Nazi Party hastily established hundreds of temporary detention facilities across Germany, many repurposed from existing prisons and poorhouses. However, the Nazis were not satisfied. After all, many of these prisons were under police management and retained some semblance of legal tradition from the Weimar Republic era. Hence, Nazi paramilitary units like the SA and the SS began establishing concentration camps directly managed by them, proliferating across German territory. The SS, or the Schutzstaffel, was a private armed unit nurtured within the Nazi Party, even more closely tied to Hitler himself. Its precursor was Hitler's personal bodyguard known as the Adolf Hitler SS. Renamed the SS in 1925, its commander was Heinrich Himmler, fiercely loyal to Hitler. Due to Hitler's favoritism, its power expanded rapidly, boasting 30,000 members by early 1933 when the Nazi Party came to power. Apart from commanding the SS, Himmler also became the Bavarian police chief, effectively controlling the German police enforcement and turning both the police and SS into instruments of Nazi repression. The first set of concentration camps established by the SS included Dachau, as mentioned earlier. Within weeks of Kahn's arrival at Dachau, the SS officially took over. In June 1933, Himmler appointed one of his trusted men, Eich, as the commandant of Dachau. As the number of camps and prisoners increased, the SS, on Eich's recommendation, formed a specialized force dedicated to camp surveillance and security, the Death's Head Units, or Totenkopf. It's important to clarify that while some research works refer to this unit as the Skull Squadron, its German name, Totenkopf, translates to Death's Head or Skull and not to a complete skeleton. The insignia of this unit, displayed on their armbands and collars, featured a chilling skull symbol. These Death's Head units became the primary executors of Nazi Germany's concentration camp policies, forever tainted by historical infamy. Nevertheless, it's crucial to emphasize that concentration camps themselves weren't a Nazi invention. The earliest versions emerged in the 1920s. During that time, a wave of anti-colonial struggles and liberation movements against Western colonial occupation erupted worldwide. Spain, the United States, and the United Kingdom, among others, established concentration camps in places like Cuba, the Philippines, and South Africa to imprison local civilians, manage them centrally, and cut off local resistance movement supplies and manpower. During World War I, major powers used large-scale camps to accommodate prisoners of war and detain civilians. These camps were brought back from colonies to European soil during the war, facilitated by various technological advancements like barbed wire, machine guns, and rudimentary shelters. While the early camps didn't evolve into the harrowing death camps like Auschwitz, once prisoners entered, they were stripped of all rights and dignity. Eich, in a speech to his subordinates, emphasized that SS guards shouldn't have any pity or sympathy for camp inmates, urging strict, heartless, and firm conduct. Therefore, these guards, stemming from Nazi Party ranks, employed inhumane violence to convey the notion that prisoners' lives were worthless. Upon arrival, inmates were severely beaten, from punches and kicks to beatings with batons and whips. Subsequently, they endured other forms of humiliation, forced to undress in public and don tattered camp garb, their heads forcibly shaved. In the guards' eyes, these inmates weren't even addressed by name, only a number. Moreover, for individuals perceived as thorns in the Nazi Party's side, SS guards executed them without trial, attributing their deaths to shot while trying to escape. These practices became institutionalized and were perpetuated across Nazi concentration camps in Europe. Compared to the prisons of the Weimar Republic era, the living conditions in concentration camps were deplorable. In the Bergen-Belsen camp in Lower Saxony, for instance, prisoners lived in rudimentary wooden barracks, each housing over 100 inmates, without running water. They queued outdoors for meager daily necessities, and their beds consisted of straw mattresses. They were compelled to wake at 4 to 6 a.m., walking for over an hour to endure arduous labor. Failure to complete tasks resulted in immediate beatings or cancellation of food rations. The primary purpose of such labor was punishment. Hundreds of inmates could have easily completed the work in a few days with a few tractors. A surviving inmate, Langhoff, recalled his hands blistered from the intense labor, each bone aching. Regarding the alleged efficacy of concentration camps, Hitler was greatly pleased. From spring 1938, the entire expense for the camps and SS guards was allocated from the Ministry of the Interior's budget. In that year alone, expenditures reached 63 million marks. Additionally, Hitler ordered that the actions of SS guards in the camps would not be subject to Germany's legal system. Previously, judicial authorities in German states occasionally investigated and even prosecuted the SS for atrocities in camps, but this oversight was abolished. Subsequently, a new wave of camps emerged, such as Sachsenhausen and Buchenwald. These camps were not only larger, occupying 80 to 100 hectares, but were more discreetly located, managed in greater secrecy, and equipped with independent facilities, including forced labor factories, garages, warehouses, gas stations, and utilities. This design aimed to create impenetrable isolated kingdoms, preventing the spread of information about abuse and killings within the camps to ordinary Germans and the international community. Soon, those confined to concentration camps transcended the category of mere political prisoners, dissidents opposing the Nazi Party, to include various groups perceived as social threats: Jews, Romani people, idle wanderers, beggars, homosexuals, and even the disabled and mentally ill. As the scale of camps expanded, the number of SS death's head units continued to rise. At its peak, Nazi Germany employed at least 60,000 people in concentration camps. Why did many Germans willingly engage in such inhumane work? Historian Wachsmann analyzed this, citing the dire economic conditions in Germany, with numerous low-ranking Nazi members desperately needing employment. Additionally, the sense of absolute power over inmates within the camps provided immense satisfaction. Remarkably, many former Nazi war criminals who had worked in camps rarely exhibited guilt post-war. Instead, they nostalgically reminisced about their empowered times. Lastly, due to the unsavory nature of the job, those entering the camp guard system quickly climbed ranks, receiving excellent treatment overall. For example, the infamous Rudolf Haas, who joined the SS in 1933, rapidly ascended the ranks to become a commandant at Dachau within 4 months. By 1936, Himmler promoted him to captain of an SS Death's Head unit, eventually elevating him to the commandant of Auschwitz in 1940. From 1938 onwards, Nazi Germany's persecution of Jews underwent systematic, large-scale escalation, and concentration camps played an increasingly crucial role in these organized atrocities. More and more Jews were herded into camps, with over 4,600 sent to camps in just June 1938. By November, due to a Jewish student shooting a German diplomat in Paris, Hitler swiftly escalated Jewish persecution to ethnic cleansing. Within days, German camps housed over 26,000 innocent civilians, mostly Jews. Due to long-term Nazi propaganda against Jews, their treatment in concentration camps was particularly horrific. They endured random beatings from guards, with almost every Jewish prisoner severely injured within days of entering the camps. Deliberately harsh living conditions prevailed, erratic food and water distribution, absence of medical facilities leading to disease outbreaks like dysentery and typhus. A camp doctor in Sachsenhausen bluntly stated that the only thing he could offer Jews was a death certificate. Amidst this escalating brutality, deaths in Nazi concentration camps soared, with Jews comprising the majority of fatalities. The average monthly death count in the German concentration camp system during the first half of 1938 stood at 18. By August, it skyrocketed to 118, reaching over 300 per month by year-end. Yet, this was only a small-scale rehearsal of the genocidal extermination of Jews by Nazi Germany after the outbreak of World War II. On the early morning of September 1, 1939, Nazi Germany mobilized a million-strong army, invading Poland, marking the outbreak of World War II. Simultaneously, the dreaded Nazi concentration camp system gradually expanded across Europe with the iron grip of Nazi Germany. In Hitler's eyes, World War II comprised two equally vital fronts: the military front, where German forces fought to expand Germany's so-called living space, and the domestic front, purifying the race within Germany in occupied territories, exterminating the so-called inferior races. Poland, the first conquered territory, immediately became an experimental ground for racial cleansing policies. To Hitler, Slavic people and Jews living in Eastern European countries up to the Soviet Union were both typical examples of the so-called inferior races. Thousands of Polish people and Jews living in Poland were sent to concentration camps. This influx saturated Germany's camp capacity. Hence, Himmler decided to establish a large new camp within Poland's borders, choosing the town of Auschwitz. It was remote enough for secretive large-scale extermination and conveniently connected to Europe through a robust railway system. In June 1940, Auschwitz commenced operations, becoming the largest camp beyond Germany's borders in 2 years. Auschwitz, in the end, became synonymous with Nazi Germany's camp system and genocide, where nearly 1 million Jews perished. For prisoners entering camps after the outbreak of World War II, their living conditions worsened rapidly. Nazi Germany drastically cut prisoner supplies under the guise of wartime emergencies. As most resources in occupied territories were allocated to sustain German citizens and the war machine, these so-called inferior races were meant to perish in starvation. An adult male engaged in moderate labor requires a minimum intake of 2,800 calories per day. Yet, in concentration camps, the prisoners' nutritional intake was at best 40% or even lower, coupled with intense physical labor. The so-called bread distributed to prisoners contained various impurities, including sawdust, while the alleged vegetable soup was nothing more than boiling water with a few rotten leaves and salt. Starving prisoners risked execution by stealing rotten vegetables and kitchen scraps to increase their caloric intake. Furthermore, after the war began, Hitler authorized Himmler to grant the SS guards in the camps the power to execute prisoners without trial. This unleashed unrestricted massacres in the camps. SS guards could execute prisoners arbitrarily. In fear and desperation, an increasing number of prisoners chose suicide to shorten their suffering. In April 1940 alone, 26 inmates died by suicide in the Sachsenhausen camp. Soon, each camp had to build its crematoria to handle the continuous influx of corpses. On January 20, 1942, a crucial secret meeting took place in a villa near Lake Wannsee on the outskirts of Berlin, the guest house of the Reich Security Main Office of Nazi Germany. Nazi Party and senior German government officials attended, led by Heydrich, Himmler's right-hand man and head of the Reich Security Main Office. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss the implementation of one of history's most horrifying crimes, the final solution to the European Jewish problem, a codename for the complete eradication of European Jews. Heydrich stressed that to achieve this goal, all relevant government departments' powers and resources must be consolidated and unified under the command of the SS. 6 months later, Himmler gathered his subordinates in Berlin, officially announcing the commencement of the thorough extermination of Jews. All European Jews would be transported to several large camps like Auschwitz. Those deemed unfit for labor, the elderly, sick, and children, would be directly slaughtered. The rest would undergo intensive labor and, upon exhausting their last bit of strength, be executed by the camp. However, it's essential to note that around a year before the Wannsee Conference, around 1941, various mass killings of prisoners had already begun in Nazi-occupied camps and prisons. Two driving forces propelled these experiments: firstly, a large-scale euthanasia program known as T4, aiming to directly eliminate all disabled people within Nazi Germany's occupied areas based on Nazi eugenics principles and prisoners deemed unfit for labor in concentration camps. Secondly, the outbreak of the Soviet-German War in June 1941. Early victories of Nazi Germany flooded concentration camps with thousands of Red Army prisoners of war, surpassing the camp's capacity. From Hitler to SS leadership, they unanimously believed that as inferior races, Soviet POWs had to be placed in the most primitive environment. Those unfit for labor had to be executed, a form of so-called natural selection. To efficiently complete the extermination task, camps experimented with various methods like injections and shootings but found them inefficient and burdensome on soldiers. Eventually, the gas chambers, deemed the most expedient and humane execution method, emerged. These chambers, disguised as large closed rooms resembling showers, could accommodate hundreds of people. Once inside, SS members poisoned the prisoners through chimneys resembling exhaust pipes. The lethal substance used for poisoning, called Zyklon B, was a type of cyanide. In September 1941, this new gas chamber was first tested in Auschwitz, and 900 Soviet POWs became the first victims of Zyklon B. Subsequently, gas chambers were swiftly introduced to other camps, and near Auschwitz, in Birkenau, for large crematoria with internal gas chambers were built, capable of processing over 4,000 bodies daily. Of course, such large-scale executions caused significant psychological obstacles for Germans within the camps. Hence, camps specifically provided extra bonuses, vacation opportunities, fine wines, and exquisite meals for soldiers willing to carry out the killing tasks. All these incentives made the soldiers believe that compared to the freezing Soviet front and combat with enemies, working in concentration camps was a cushy job akin to paradise. Soon, large camps like Auschwitz became systematic killing assembly lines. Every month, dozens of trains belonging to the Nazi Empire's Central Security Bureau transported thousands, primarily Jews, to these camps. These fully enclosed trains had extreme conditions, devoid of food and water supply. Due to severe overcrowding, almost everyone had to endure the journey standing, resulting in many weakened elders and children dying during transit. Upon arrival, prisoners were immediately forced off the trains by SS guards, subjected to physical violence. They were ordered to surrender all belongings and property and then, based on gender, crudely divided into two groups. Families faced separation, spouses, fathers and daughters, mothers and sons, brothers and sisters, all desperately wishing for one last embrace but brutally pulled apart and assaulted by guards. Consequently, many never saw their loved ones again. Following this, the prisoners, still immersed in terror and sorrow, were ordered to line up in groups of 5 and quickly move towards a few SS officers to undergo what was called a selection. In reality, these officers were concentration camp doctors, tasked with rapidly determining whether these prisoners still possessed the ability to work. The process was simple: a quick glance at their physique, a question about their age, then a finger gesture indicating whether to proceed to the left or right. According to author Wachsmann, the prisoners had no idea that a mere gesture from the doctors determined whether they lived or died on the spot. After the selection, hours later, the majority of the prisoners were sent to the gas chambers to be killed, with only about 20% temporarily spared to work. Among the most tragically affected were the children. From 1942 to 1945, around 210,000 children were brought to Auschwitz, with only 2,500 temporarily surviving the selection process. Most children under 14 were immediately sent to the gas chambers upon arrival. Some compassionate elder prisoners, upon the train's arrival, took the opportunity during wagon cleaning to advise newcomers that to survive, they should appear healthy, state their age between 16 and 40, and give their children to older relatives or friends. Simultaneously, with direct support from Himmler, camp doctors conducted a series of inhumane medical experiments using prisoners as subjects. Over 20,000 prisoners were coerced into these experiments, resulting in thousands of deaths, deliberate infections, untested vaccines or antibiotics, exposure to freezing or high-pressure environments to gather valuable physiological data, even direct abdominal irradiation for sterilization experiments. However, in the eyes of Nazi Germany's leadership, the vast concentration camp system served not only as death factories but also as a highly efficient and cost-effective human production machine, bringing significant economic benefits to Germany. The idea of using concentration camp prisoners to boost Germany's war economy was formed among the Nazi Party elite shortly after the camp's inception. In February 1934, Himmler promoted a man named Pohl, a former naval financial officer, appointing him head of the SS main economic and administrative office. Pohl gradually gained control of the SS financial authority. Himmler saw the SS, already a state within a state, in desperate need of more financial resources to cover various expenses. Pohl, being proficient in management and finance, was considered the best candidate for the job. In 1938, Hitler conceived an ambitious construction project to systematically upgrade major German cities, including the capital, Berlin, to showcase the Nazi Empire's power and status. Himmler directed the SS to establish the German earth and stone works, intending to use concentration camp labor to produce building materials to meet Hitler's demands. From May to August of that year, 2 new labor camps, Flossenburg in Bavaria and Mauthausen in Austria, were established. These locations had rich granite deposits and existing quarries. However, to rapidly expand capacity, thousands of so-called professional criminals and the social elements were confined to these camps, forced into arduous, high-intensity labor with meager wages of 0.3 marks per day for prisoners. Consequently, the business immediately generated substantial profits for the SS. By 1942, with Germany facing defeats on multiple fronts and losing a significant portion of its industrial workforce due to conscription, the need for military production grew. Additionally, the Allies' formidable economic production capability showed overwhelming superiority. Under these circumstances, the SS High Command had to consider involving more concentration camp prisoners in war production. Himmler decided to place the entire concentration camp system under the SS Economy and Administration Department, under Pohl's full control. By the summer of 1943, about 6.5 million prisoners from across Europe were working as slave labor in camps and factory workshops. For instance, Monowitz, near Auschwitz, operated as a vast slave factory for the German chemical giant IG Farben, producing essential war materials such as synthetic rubber, gasoline, and cement. The intense labor caused prisoners to lose weight at a rate of 2 to 4 kilograms per week. A concentration camp doctor admitted after the war that most prisoners died after 3 to 4 months of labor. To maintain factory output, regular selections were conducted at Monowitz. Those unfit for labor were immediately sent to gas chambers, replaced by new arrivals. Furthermore, to directly manufacture crucial weaponry, the SS established satellite camps near various German military-industrial enterprises, housing prisoners who worked inside these factories. For instance, near Munich, the SS set up a satellite camp where 2,000 Dachau prisoners labored daily, heading to the nearby BMW aircraft engine factory. Due to increasingly intense Allied bombings of Germany's mainland, the country had to move more and more war production lines to underground factories in mountainous areas. For example, in the Harz Mountains in central Germany, prisoners from Dora-Mittelbau camp excavated 2 enormous tunnels to produce V-2 missiles for attacks on mainland Britain. Over 10,000 prisoners toiled in these dark tunnels, working continuously, surrounded by foul air, accidents, noise, and dust. According to statistics, from early 1944 to March, over 1/3 of the prisoners died on site due to construction-related incidents. Only a minuscule number of prisoners with specialized skills improved their survival conditions through such labor. For example, approximately 140 Jewish draftsmen and graphic designers were transferred from Auschwitz to Sachsenhausen camp to engage in a secretive operation, forging counterfeit British pounds. The aim was to purchase scarce goods on the international black market for Germany or disrupt the British currency market. A prisoner named Bugle recalled feeling like he'd moved from hell to heaven. No more beatings, sufficient food, working in a heated room every day, and leisure time for reading, playing cards, and listening to the radio. Moreover, the personal belongings of concentration camp prisoners became a significant source of support for Nazi Germany's war efforts. According to the author's calculations, only in Auschwitz and Majdanek, millions of marks worth of prisoners' assets fell into the hands of the SS, with a small portion embezzled by SS guards and the vast majority becoming Nazi government property, deposited into a special account at the Imperial Bank. The ruthlessly inhumane Nazi concentration camp system, maintained for 12 years, finally collapsed as Nazi Germany faced successive defeats on the battlefield, crumbling away. Starting from the summer of 1944, with the Allies' continuous advances on both eastern and western fronts, the area of German-occupied territory continued to shrink, resulting in the hurried abandonment of one concentration camp after another by the SS. Unfortunately, for many unfortunate prisoners, their lives ended at the very last moment before liberation. During the camp evacuations, efforts were made to take away those who could still work, leaving behind the elderly, weak, and sick who were hastily silenced. Additionally, tens of thousands perished from disease or exhaustion during the death marches, the forced evacuations. Among these victims was Anne Frank, the Jewish girl renowned worldwide for her diary. Her life was frozen at the age of 15. In October 1944, Anne and her sister Margot, along with thousands of other prisoners, were transferred from Auschwitz, eventually arriving at Bergen-Belsen in Germany. The temporary transitional camp was crowded and filthy, leading to a massive outbreak of diseases. In March 1945 alone, among 45,000 detainees at Bergen-Belsen, 18,000 died, including the Frank sisters, who contracted typhus and dysentery. According to other prisoners' recollections, even as Anne was near death, she was trying to care for her dying sister, saying, "Here, we can lie on one bed together, so calmly." Alright, here's the main content of The History of Nazi Concentration Camps. This comprehensive 2-volume work, totaling over 800,000 words, stands as the most thorough and in-depth study of the Nazi concentration camp system in history. I believe that, like me, after reading it, you'll experience a profound and heavy sensation. What's documented here is among the darkest and most inhumane chapters in human history. Author Wachsmann states that the camps symbolized the destruction of human progress and civilizational beliefs, showcasing the extreme capacity for brutality that shook fundamental human judgments due to this incredibly evil existence. Jeffrey Hartman, head of Yale University's Fortunoff Archive, specializing in Nazi genocide-related materials, expressed a similar sentiment, saying, "Before Auschwitz, we were children who could only imagine evil, but after Auschwitz, we are no longer children." Through Wachsmann's narrative, we learn that the Nazi concentration camp system evolved from a temporary Nazi party institution that undermined legal systems and persecuted dissenters into a systematic killing and exploitation machine that implemented racial extermination, coinciding with the establishment of the Nazi regime and Germany's aggressive expansion during World War II. Fortunately, this terrifying regime, along with Hitler's so-called New Order, ceased to exist after 12 years, due to worldwide opposition and resistance. Philosopher Zygmunt Bauman, in his renowned work Modernity and the Holocaust, suggests that the modern society once profoundly admired and praised by humanity was the breeding ground for Nazi genocide. The concentration camp system, fundamentally rooted in the two systems supporting modern society, industrial production and bureaucratic management, bore striking similarities to the latter two. With clear division of labor, emphasis on discipline and efficiency, it horrifyingly neutralized the values of every member, focusing solely on task completion, disregarding whether the system's actions and goals were correct or ethical. As highlighted in Wachsmann's work, it was the disciplined, obedient Germans, including experts from various industries, who, through their knowledge and expertise, meticulously refined and executed Hitler's insane ideas of exterminating Jews and other so-called inferior races. Post-war, even those survivors fortunate enough to escape Nazi concentration camps suffered unparalleled psychological impacts from this dark experience. They were tormented not only by the atrocities they faced but also by the extreme degradation of human nature in such abhorrent environments. Even their survival itself bore a sense of guilt. These survivors spent their remaining lives grappling with various psychological traumas, with many unable to bear the weight, choosing to end their lives. For instance, Primo Levi, a renowned Italian writer and Auschwitz survivor who tragically committed suicide in 1987, extensively detailed his experiences and, in his memoir, If This Is a Man, rigorously questioned his own conscience. He believed that in the harsh conditions of the camp, every survivor had, to some extent, violated morality and their own conscience, bearing an eternal burden of guilt. Levi sorrowfully declared in his book, In the Camp, the best of us died first, and those who survived were the worst. Therefore, standing nearly a century later and looking back on this dark history, the only thing worth celebrating is that humanity, after paying a grievous price, reached a consensus: such tragedies should never happen again. That concludes the essence of this book. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you all for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom and practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future together. Thank you, goodbye.